You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Dr. Brooke Ingersoll, a leading autism researcher and director of the MSU Autism Research Lab. She'll be sharing insights on parent-mediated interventions, Project Impact, and the RISE study. These topics offer valuable support for families and individuals in the autism community. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Brooke Ingersoll.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I am very interested in this topic, not only how it impacts families and empowers parents to really be a part of the intervention, but also just the implications that it could have even beyond just a family, and how that could empower clinicians to be able to take some of the concepts and put it in practice. But before we go there, most folks have this passion to be able to serve, or to be able to help the autistic community, or to be able to empower children. And it comes from somewhere. I mean, we all have that inclination of, why did I get into this research? Do you mind sharing your story?
Sure. So, I was in college at the time, and this was back in the early 1990s when obviously very, much of what we know about autism today and sort of the general public was just not was just not available. And so I think I probably had heard about autism maybe one time in one of my psychology courses, which is kind of so crazy to me when I think back. It doesn't seem that long ago, but really the public awareness has grown dramatically since then. But at the time I was getting close to graduating, and I really at that point hadn't really found what I wanted to do. I was a psych major. I was broadly interested in children and intervention, but didn't really have a focus. And I was reading the school newspaper, and a family had advertised in the newspaper looking for basically college students who could come into their home. They were willing to train them to be able to work with their child. And this was really before ABA had proliferated at all. So this family was really very resourceful and very much doing this on their own. And, I was very intrigued, and I, answered the ad, and it ended up being a kind of a life-changing experience for me. I really got to see the impact of, early intervention on a family. I got to see kind of the amazing gains that the child made over time. I got to see some of the challenges that the family was experiencing and trying to get some different approaches paid for. I mean, they were doing this all out of pocket. There weren't agencies that could help them deliver it. They were organizing everything themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that really helped me think about, what we need to be doing to try to make these types of services available more broadly, not just for those families that have the resources to be able to put it all together. And so that kind of got me interested in the area. And then after I graduated from college, I moved to Atlanta, and I had the opportunity to work at the Walden Early Education Programs, which is out of Emory, and they were doing an inclusion-based ABA program. So I got to see ABA implemented in a very, very different way from the more traditional structured approaches, which were being used in the early 90s, to a much more naturalistic, inclusive environment where ABA principles were embedded in classroom routines, and the children were being served the same way, whether they had a diagnosis of autism or whether they were typically developing. And I saw that, you can really use these principles in daily, everyday activities to the benefit of everyone. Mm-hmm. And that really got me much more interested in, how do we make these services not only available more broadly to families, but how do we make the intervention strategies more natural? And how do we make them more available so that we can embed them in those daily routines that kids are doing anyway?
Yeah, and it's funny is that oftentimes a lot of the same techniques that you might be using to empower an autistic individual are the same ones
Oh,
that you
totally.
might be using to empower any child. And it's
Yes.
sometimes we look at them as so different conceptually. I think it's just, the level of application that may
Exactly.
change and individuality of how we're applying those services. You had mentioned, though, is that you got started because a family was trying to be able to really work with their child. And one thing that I believe has, from early 90s all the way to now, still remains a cornerstone of good care is parental involvement and making sure that the families have a role that they feel like they're integrated directly into the treatment. They feel like they have a voice and the goals reflect what's important to them. Can you explain some of these parent mediated interventions and I guess the general concept and the approach and why that's important?
Absolutely. And I think you captured it so well in terms of the importance of family involvement. And I think, when we hear the term parent mediated intervention, I kind of want to emphasize that, there are many different ways to work with families and involve them into their child services. And, we have a history of many years of parents being involved, particularly if we look at the ABA trajectory. The earliest studies involved training, and I use the word training here, training parents to deliver ABA strategies with their children.
Hmm.
So it's got a long history. But when I think about parent mediated intervention, I see that as sort of an extension plus, where we're no longer treating parents as like an intervention deliverer. We're not taking our same models that we teach therapists to do and then plopping them in and saying, parents, you're going to be an extra therapist.
Hmm.
We are taking a very different approach where we're talking to parents about what is important to you. What do you need? What do you need from us? And then how do we help you get there? So there's parents are still very centrally involved. There is an element of the parents learning intervention strategies that can support interactions, but it's taking it away from the here's an intervention program. Here are the goals that we set as experts, and now we're going to go teach you to do this, and you'll be part of our team. And
Hmm.
really coming to putting the family center, which is what do you need, what are you looking for, what goals do you have for your child, where are you struggling, and then let us help you find those strategies that we can embed in your daily routines with your child that will help you achieve those goals. So it's a, again, similar but kind of different frame and different focus that I think much more closely captures the needs of the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it fair to say that there's been a pendulum swing? I mean,
Yes.
the initial research might have been very focused on, I'm going to look at the environment and figure out how the family can really support the child in their environment to be able to take advantage of everything that that child wants to be engaged in
Yeah.
and feel a part to I am going to have this family be almost like a technician,
Yeah.
and you're running and taking data on everything you're doing, and you're getting that back to me.
Yeah.
And now we're swinging back the other way to realize that the extension to family is more important on the relationship side and on the self-determination of the child, helping the child just to be empowered throughout the day. But not all those strategies are truly understood, not only by family members, but also by clinicians. And it sounds like Project Impact is tackling some of that. And this is one of those, I
Yeah.
think, really important projects that you're working on and the study that kind of precipitated it. But can you give us an idea of what Project Impact is and maybe even some of the interventions and how that worked with the family?
Sure. So I'm assuming some of your audience is aware of some of the broader theoretical foundations behind the type of intervention approach that we use, but I'll just be very brief. Project Impact is based on a naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention or NDBI approach. And this is a term that kind of is a, kind of an umbrella term that covers a number of different interventions that share a couple core features. They are a very thoughtful integration of ABA principles that are implemented within natural contexts. So as you said at the
Mhm.
beginning, that these aren't just strategies that are specifically for autistic children. These are intervention components that work for everyone.
Mhm.
And we can make them very, very structured, or we can embed them in natural interactions. And so the ABA principles that are included in NDBIs are really built on those more naturalistic practices. But they also then integrate a lot of research that has come out over the past 20 years on how autistic children learn and develop. And so the early social communication skills and how those emerge and how we can support those particular skills within meaningful interactions. And so it's this really thoughtful integration of ABA principles and developmental science that has kind of come together to kind of create a set of strategies that are kind of similar across a number of different programs. So I always say that because people hear sort of the names of programs like Project Impact. And then, but I want to recognize it's got a lot of similar strategies to other NDBI programs like ESDM or Pivotal Response Training or PRT or Jasper, some of these other programs that they have probably more similarities than differences.
Okay.
And some of the strategies we might see here, just to give you a really brief, is following the child's focus of attention, following into what the child's doing, joining them in their interests, and that would often for young children is play, but it also can be things like bath time or getting your child dressed, getting ready to go outside, building in learning opportunities around what your child's doing. Joining them in that activity, changing a little bit the way you communicate with your child to emphasize nonverbal aspects of communication, to make sure that you're talking about what they're attending to, so you're not demanding that they shift their attention. Creating natural situations where children need to initiate or communicate. So rather than anticipating what they need, kind of playing dumb and
Mhm.
giving them opportunities to request things that they need help with or that they would like more of. Again, all around their interests. And then incorporating some basic prompting and reinforcement strategies to help the child use slightly more complex skills. So helping by, for example, showing them a new way to do something and then kind of helping provide some additional support to help them be able to do that. So over time, they're able to be able to communicate and initiate and play and imitate much more independently.
And it sounds like having it be more naturalistic to where the child's interests already lie, it makes
Absolutely.
it so that learning opportunities are not, I don't know, they're not intrusive. They're not going to create a friction between a child and a parent, which is pretty important when you're trying to teach new skills in
Right.
that environment. So you mentioned child. Is that really the target client would be, I'm looking at early childhood, or does this expand all the way through adolescence? Is there a stopping point where we should be looking at something differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as these are really good strategies that are for children who are kind of in the early language learning developmental phase. And so, just for Project Impact, for example, the strategies that we really focus on work really well for children up until the point that they're kind of really conversational. And at that point, once they're able to kind of have conversations or have kind of more complex, communication, um, then I think you can rely on some additional strategies that allow them to do more self-reflection, that can help them, interact with their peers in more detail, that can help them monitor their own behavior. So these strategies really can be used well for obviously young children, but I think they also can be successful for children that are a little bit older, develop a little bit older chronologically, but who may be still in that earlier developmental stage.
So the developmental age is really kind of what you're encompassing as far as, that target group that is going to be impacted the most through the
Exactly.
project.
Because the
Okay.
types of skills we're targeting are those skills that are kind of designed for, those skills that are really important for building those early
Mhm.
relationships and early communication system.
And it kind of leans to the idea that when when a family comes in and they meet with a psychologist, they're hearing everything that's about to come onto their plate as far as all the options for treatment, what that time commitment's going to be, how they're going to restructure their entire life and what that's going to feel like. Does having something that's truly focused on the family and understanding their ecology and how they operate, does that take some of the feeling of being overwhelmed off their plate from the beginning because it's more tailored to their lives?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll say that every family is different. And so I don't want to advocate that you have one approach that is best for everyone. So I think everyone kind of comes into the situation sort of with different needs. But I would say in general, most families really find having someone that can support them in interacting with their child in a way that is meaningful to them is incredibly empowering. And when we talk to families who have received parent coaching and Project Impact and other programs, I mean, that is one of the first things that parents talk about in terms of their experience of, I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like the strategies I'd used with my other children weren't being successful. Kind of this real overwhelm of like, how do I connect with my child who I love very much in a way that my child can kind of connect back with me. And so we hear parents often talk about how once they started to receive some coaching that was within the context of what their family looked like, that there was a significant decrease in sort of their anxiety and their stress as they started to realize that they can do a lot of these things. They don't need to wait for an expert to come and work directly with their child. That doesn't mean that they don't also benefit from those things, but I think it can take off some of that initial overwhelm that parents experience when they get a diagnosis.
And it probably gives a starting point. I mean, we have a shortage of specialized providers, and having the family have some skills that they can start to implement while they're waiting for other complementary services, it becomes very important. Would it be safe to say that, I mean, you said every family's different, and obviously every person, and let alone every child with autism, is different. Would it be safe to say that this could be seen as a standalone for some families, but it could be seen as a complement to even comprehensive care for other families?
Yes. That's exactly the way I see this type of approach, is that particularly in situations where you are in an intervention environment where there's either limited resources or limited time. I think I always say if you only have 1 hour a week for therapy, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck if that 1 hour a week is spent helping coach those individuals that live with the child than if you spend 1 hour a week working with the child. So I mean, that is my very firm belief that if we're thinking about just like how do we actually how do we help, we're going to do more help if we are in a sort of in a treatment environment where we have limited. But there's also times where that might be what the family needs, depending on what the child and family's needs are. Some families really are not looking for more intensive intervention models. Some families really just need some additional strategies they can use to help engage their child, and then through the other activities their child's doing, embed these learning opportunities, and that works really well for their families. But many families also need more intensive services, and I see this kind of parent-mediated approach as being very complementary, as going alongside. And where I see the real benefit to this type of approach, where it is developed and conceptualized as a parent-mediated approach, is you're coming into it where you're starting from the standpoint of like, let's set the goals with the parents around what they want, rather than coming in and saying, we've developed a comprehensive intervention program. Here are our goals, and now we're going to teach you what we're doing. It's a very different approach. So I think that when I see it working really well alongside a comprehensive program is when people are really treating it as complementary as opposed to an extension of the comprehensive program, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And my brain immediately defaults to, why wouldn't this be the norm for every behavior analyst, every speech pathologist, every occupational therapist to say, hey, you know what, I got things that maybe I'm working on with the child, but I need ways that the family can be empowered to
Yeah.
be able to carry on treatment. And I need to create specific goals for these families around what their life is and
Yeah.
what their interactions are. Is that kind of when we're talking about, the complement that this provides, it's not just with ABA. It seems to me like this could be a complement to all early intervention services.
Yes, I mean, absolutely, I see that. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that is very nice about NDBI interventions more generally is that they really they are informed by multiple disciplines. It's not just ABA, but they're informed by communication sciences, early intervention approaches. And so like a general NDBI approach can be used effectively by providers from a lot of different disciplinary backgrounds. And I see that as these are early skills, young autistic children and children showing early social communication delays benefit from learning.
Yeah.
And so they can be implemented by an ABA provider, but they can also be implemented by a speech language pathologist who's also really concerned about early social communication development, occupational therapist who's concerned about early functional skills. These are kind of a set of skills that I think that can be used broadly. And I very strongly feel that, a family-based approach is going to be most helpful, particularly for these young kids.
And when I'm looking at the concept of the practice effect, and even with most developmental approaches, it's giving opportunity. The how opportunity looks is going to be different based off the environment, and what technique we use should also differ based off of who's delivering it and what relationship is there and what that environment looks like. So that whole process makes a lot of sense to me. But obviously, is that any time where there is not that this is a new concept, but a different concept than what everybody is functioning off of at the moment, is that there's misconceptions. I mean, what are the common things that you're hearing right now?
In terms of like, about parent-mediated intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that I think one misconception is that I see a lot with providers, and and I say this because a lot of the work that I actually do is directly with providers in trying to get them to change practices.
Mm-hmm.
So my early work was very heavily with parents as we were developing the strategies and in developing the programs to really make sure that this works within family lives. And then now a lot of what I do is really working with providers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I see, having done work on both sides now, is many intervention providers have a view of the family and the family's role that is not always as empowering as it could be. So I see one of the biggest barriers to using this approach is often providers acting as gatekeepers, often coming from the perspective that they're doing it in the family's best interest. So it's not that I think these providers are intentionally trying to hold back something families want, but providers are making clinical decisions all the time, and they are using the information from their practice, from the insurance requirements, from all sorts of things to decide what are they going to do with a client, from the the agency requirements. And I think there are a number of barriers that actually get in the way from providers who would really benefit from using this approach. I could talk a little bit about those. I could go on for hours about those, but I think some things are things like insurance requirements in terms of how supervision is done to be able to collect reimbursement. We don't do a really good job of building in opportunities for BCBAs to do parent coaching and get reimbursed effectively for that. It's a slightly different service, and it's so I think there are barriers at the level of sort of like agency insurance reimbursement that make it a less desired practice. I think also, even when providers are able to kind of get around that, I think sometimes we see policies being put in like kind of a dogmatic way, like all parents need to meet with their provider this many times to have their services funded. And that's a very adversarial way to go in, not like, hey, we're here to help you. And this is, this is a requirement you're just supposed to show up for. So one of the things that was very interesting and some of the work that one of my former graduate students did, Carice Casagrande, she was working with parents and providers within our Medicaid autism benefit in Michigan, which is basically Medicaid funded ABA services.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we found was that there was just very, very low rates of parent-mediated intervention happening within the system, very low rates. And, she did some work with the families, and, providers were telling us, oh, these families don't want it. They don't show up for the parent sessions. They don't value it. They don't see why we should do it. I mean, and these things were pretty negative. And then when she was talking to the families were like, we really want this. We really care. This would be so helpful. And it turns out that providers had a different perception of like what these sessions should look like. So parents wanted active coaching and providers were just giving treatment updates. Mm-hmm. And eventually the parents were like, well, that isn't valuable to me. Like, I don't just want to know how he's doing on these drills. Like, I want to know what I'm supposed to be doing at home when I'm having difficulty getting him dressed in the morning. Yeah. And so I think there was just a lot of miscommunication, and parents didn't know what they should be asking for, or they could be asking for it. Mm-hmm. And then providers saw that as a lack of interest. And so I think a lot of it's just sort of everyone's trying to do their best, but it's like a breakdown in understanding kind of what general processes do we need to use to really let parents know they're an active member of mm-hmm. that team, and that they can ask for this type of service.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact that research was done by the grad student that you had mentioned, is that I strongly believe that there's not a lot of education that's occurring while somebody is going through their master's program in applied behavior analysis, yep. or on anything on how to work effectively right. with families. And it's learned on the job. Yep. So depending on where you're going and how good your supervisor or your organization is at being able to really educate and give you the opportunity to develop those skills, is that yep. you might be hampered a good portion of your career because yep. you just haven't been exposed to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that something that, I mean, you've done so much work on the research end, which mm-hmm. should be informing practices. It's informing the care of families, but is this something that potentially could be informing grad programs on how to make it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's honestly where we're going to have the most success in really changing practices, because I think that, once you've been, there's a lot of in-service training, but there are barriers once you've already gotten everything up and going. I think we really need to be starting at the graduate training level. And I think you're right. I think the assumption is these are skills you'll just develop on the job, but it's very variable about whether mm-hmm. you're going to be exposed to those types of things. And particularly in a lot of environments where a lot of services are being provided, maybe like by contracted employees, you're going out into the home, you're not seeing your colleagues, you're just going into a home. And so if you don't have a lot of exposure early on, I think it's easy to develop habits mm-hmm. That then become harder to break. And I will say that I think doing good quality parent-mediated intervention is hard, because we are expecting providers to use two sets of skills. There's, you got to be really good at using the intervention techniques and working with kids. And most people go into the field because they want to work with kids. Mm-hmm. And it's a totally different set of skills in working with adults. And so we're kind of asking them to do two things, but only teaching them how to do one thing.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the components that you already mentioned is that if somebody is not valuing the service mm-hmm. the way that it's being done right now, is that you as a service provider need to figure out what that perception of value is so that you can make sure that you're meeting it, still being true to your practice, being true to the science, but understanding that I need to adapt how this is being delivered because it does not have social validity to it the way that I'm doing it right now. And that becomes very important. So you've seen this pendulum. It's not a pendulum that's fully implemented at this
Yeah.
point. I mean, we're still empowering more clinicians and more families to take some of these technologies and put them into play. But are there new programs? Are there new initiatives that we should be keeping our eye on? I feel like in the field is that things change on a regular basis. What am
Yes.
I missing?
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, I think that we're seeing some like larger training sort of training initiatives. Really, I mean, I have said I will say in my 20 now some years of time in this field, I guess probably longer than that. I've definitely seen much more awareness on the benefits and the potential processes of involving families. So when I first started, like I felt like when we were out in the community and training providers, we were basically saying like, let's do this thing. People were looking at us like we were like, what? That's not what intervention is supposed to be. The whole point of intervention is you're supposed to be doing intensive work one-on-one with a child, you know. And I do remember early sessions where people would actively keep the parents out of the room because they felt like the child was, better regulated when they were just one-on-one with the child. And so I've definitely seen a dramatic change, and I think that is a very positive benefit. But it's still interesting, when we do trainings internationally, we find that even when we've seen things change in some places, other areas, other countries are still, kind of struggling with what does autism intervention look like and what should it look like. So I think that we are seeing a sea change, but I also think it's hard to do anything well. And so I think that whenever you're trying to do like very large scale training and implementation, we also have to think about like, how do we do this well? How do we get people to change their practices in ways that they actually agree with and see the benefit to? I think I always am really, I think policy drives a lot of services for good and for bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we are starting to see some more policies coming into place that I think are helpful in terms of supporting the use of parent-mediated interventions. But then I always get nervous by any sort of top-down approach that says all people need to have this thing, because I think that again misses the individualization that we need for good quality services.
Yeah, and most times I feel like the having whether it's a workforce or having a family voice that's pushing folks to realize I need to be putting more time and energy into these skill sets because people are asking for them. People
Yeah.
are wanting them. I think that is the way to kind of create that groundswell of change. But that takes having those resources. So
Yeah.
where can our listeners find the work that you're doing, find the resources, and start challenging their organizations or their providers
Yes.
to
Yes.
learn?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place. I mean, obviously, one of the challenges that we have is I think a lot of the people that are doing some of the research and the development end of things are not disseminating through the channels that most providers and most parents are accessing. I do think we do need to do a better job of leveraging things like social media. I think that is where we see a lot of providers, particularly younger folks, younger than me. I'm a little old for, understanding how all of that works, but I know a lot of families and a lot of providers are accessing information that way. So I actually think that is a really great way of creating that groundswell, that push to get families to know this is what this looks like, and hey, I can ask my provider to do this.
Yeah.
And if provider has a parent asking them for it, I mean, those providers are most likely going to turn around and say, sure, I'd love to learn how to do this. Parents are asking for this, and I don't know how to do this as well. And I can go to these websites and either see information on it or find out more information about where I can get trained. I will say that as someone that is really not good with social media, and but I feel like we need folks that are good at this approach. I think the challenge is we also see a lot of dissemination of like ideas that are not really well validated and perhaps could be counterproductive. So I think that is, that can be a challenge. But
Yeah.
I think those are some ways. I mean, we have a website that has information about our Project Impact program, about the materials, about training opportunities. It's got like a short video so parents can actually see what a coaching session would look like. I think even just knowing what that kind of thing is, I think can be helpful. So I think that is one, that is something. There's obviously lots of other programs out there that have, materials available. I think there are self-directed tutorials that parents can complete. So even if their provider themselves isn't doing coaching, parents can develop some of those skills on their own and then at least talk to their provider about it. So I think those will be ways that we can really help, change practices in other ways besides just, waiting for people to make the decision on their own.
Or forcing somebody into something.
Or forcing somebody into something,
oftentimes educating is the most important step. And then people will follow that passion. Well, Brooke, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. And hopefully what it does is creates more conversation from others and then exploration from that. But I appreciate you coming on, and I think that the work that you're doing is unbelievable, and I think that it should be looked at as being incorporated into as many practice modalities as possible. So hopefully we can have you back on again sometime as this continues to proliferate. And the next time what we'll hear is that, we're having success on being able to get them into grad programs, right? We're seeing it incorporated. So
absolutely. Well,
thank
you
so
so much.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.